Hello and welcome to Show and Tell with me, Stephen Leslie, the series where I show you some photographs and then go on to fabricate some old nonsense about them. This, I think, is episode 8. To be honest with you, I've started to lose track of time, but what I do know for certain is that today's episode could be fantastic because it's about one of my favourite photographers ever. The recently, sadly departed, but always fantastic and always outspoken William Klein.
It's all bullshit.
So Klein died earlier this year in September, just before I launched this channel, in fact, in October. And for a while, I was thinking about doing a kind of tribute to him as the very first film. But he wasn't bald, he always had a great head of hair, and by then I was sort of deep into the bald film research. So I didn't do that, and then I hummed and hawed over what kind of film that I should make. I didn't know whether I should just make a tribute, but then loads of obituaries started to appear, and I really got stuck. I couldn't work out what kind of film I wanted to make.
Wanted to do a film on which dealt with brainwashing and bullshit in general.
So among the things I love about William Klein, apart from the fact that he swore like a trooper, are the fact that he had a great sense of humour and he was a tremendous improviser. If you look at the range of his photography, it's astonishingly varied. He was a phenomenal street photographer. This one was taken at a baseball match at Ebbets Field in New York in 1955. But he also worked in fashion. He made truly experimental books, he directed documentaries, he directed feature films, he directed adverts, he was a painter. I mean, there really was nothing that he wouldn't try, and everything he did do, he did with originality and panache. He was an original, he was a one-off, and he was, like we've mentioned before, incredibly outspoken. And you know what he said to me the first time I met him?
Who is this asshole?
But I don't just want to spend the next 20-25 minutes showering praise on William Klein, because there's enough films and articles that you can go and see and read that do that already. I want to try and do something a little bit different. So what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to give you a kind of condensed biography of Klein's life, because it really was an extraordinary life and it's worth considering to sort of introduce him to people who might not know who he is. And then after that, what I think I'm going to do is show you some Klein photos that I don't think you can see anywhere else, certainly not in their entirety, which is a bold claim, but it's a claim that I think I can make. So yeah, that's the plan. So we better get cracking because there's a lot to cover. So the challenge I've set myself is to sum up or encapsulate Klein's life in under 10 minutes before I go on to show you this allegedly exclusive material. So we better get going. Klein was born into a poor Jewish family who lived close to Harlem in New York in 1928. His father was wiped out by the Great Depression, which struck the year after his son was born, but young William always dreamt of being an artist. And bizarrely, it was the Second World War that was to give Klein the opportunity to realise his dreams. What I find so intriguing is that so many great photographers, many of whom were Jewish, started their photographic life and their artistic life by fleeing Europe and coming to America, whereas Klein, almost typically, did exactly the opposite. His artistic life began when he left America and went to Europe. Klein was too young to actually fight in the war, but he was apparently a horse-mounted radio operator in Paris, although that might be bullshit. And apparently he also won his first camera, a Rolleiflex, in an army poker game, although that might also be bullshit. Also, apparently what he did was enroll in army boxing matches, which would then qualify him for a weekend pass out in Paris. But then he would try and rig the match so that he didn't get hurt too much.
It's all bullshit.
These myths about Klein are fantastic and legion, but the truths are even better. After he'd served his time in the army, he was given the opportunity by something called the GI Bill of Rights to study for 2 years wherever he wanted, and so he chose to go to the Sorbonne in Paris, who wouldn't, where he was taught by the great French painter Fernand Léger, and Léger blew Klein's mind wide open. He encouraged him to go out and experience art in the daily life of cities rather than in stuffy museums and books. Klein started painting abstract murals and then won a commission to create a design for a moving wall panel or room divider. He saw the blurred effect that his camera created when one of the panels got knocked, and this made him appreciate the unique look that motion blur could give a photograph. Like he said later on, life is blurred, and it was this blur, this ability to incorporate movement and activity, that was to become his forte and his signature. Some of his abstract, blurred mural photographs got published on the front cover of Domus magazine and also featured in an exhibition in 1954 in Paris, where they were seen by Alexander Lieberman, the exiled Ukrainian art director of American Vogue. And guess what? That's right, Lieberman offered Klein a job. Now Lieberman knew his onions. He had worked with many great photographers. Here's a photo of him taken by Irving Penn in 1948, and he was a decent photographer himself. Here's a photo he took of Irving Penn in 1950. Lieberman saw something in Klein, and so suddenly Klein, who previously knew nothing about fashion and was not by any means a trained or professional photographer, now found himself on the payroll as a photographer at Vogue. Astonishingly, Lieberman believed in Klein so much that he gave him carte blanche to do whatever he wanted. And what Klein wanted to do at this stage was to go back to New York, to his hometown, and start experimenting in photography. And so that's what he did. He went back to New York, he set up a dark room in his bathroom, and he started to take photographs.
So I went out in the street and I just photographed the shit out of New York. I was free to do what I wanted, and I didn't know that I was doing anything revolutionary.
And what's really interesting is that for a brief time, at exactly the same time in history, around 1954, 1955, Lieberman also gave a few jobs to another photographer in New York, and that was Robert Frank. At one point, both Frank and Klein were sent by Lieberman to shoot the same charity event, Elsa Maxwell's Toy Ball at the Waldorf in 1955. And here are their photos. Frank's is a cool, detached, classic shot. It's lovely, but it could have been taken by almost any decent photographer in New York at that time. Now take a look at the shots that Klein did. They're completely different. They're nightmarish and otherworldly. They're unique. Lieberman, it should be noted, didn't publish any of them, either Klein's or Frank's. Klein didn't care. He shot all over New York like a man possessed for 6 months, determined to treat it in a new, entirely different way. He wanted to give it a kick in the balls and then photograph its head spinning, and that's exactly what he did. His images are full of guns and grins and men getting ready to punch the photographer in the face. Not only is it dizzy with blur and movement and dirt, but he designed it to look like a newspaper, like the New York Daily News. The photographs are deliberately pushed up alongside each other so you can't tell where one ends and another one starts. Some pages have more information on them than it is possible for the mind to process. The contrast is so high that you worry the ink will rub off on your fingers. Klein's problem was that no one would publish this Frankensteinian book that he'd come up with.
But when I went to editors in New York and I showed these photographs, they said, "What kind of New York is this? You make New York look like a slum." And I said, "Well, New York is a slum. And what do you know about New York? You live on Fifth Avenue. You come to the office on Madison Avenue. You've never been to the Bronx. You don't know anything about the Queens or anything." Anyhow, and they say, "Yeah, well, the photographs are shit." I said, "That's what you think. I think these photographs are interesting." And, well, I never found an American editor.
So he went back to France. He took it to Chris Marker, who published the book in 1956, initially only in Europe, a full 2 years before Robert Frank's The Americans, which also had to go to Paris in order to get into print. Whereas Frank's book is a melancholy and poetic survey of the entire country, Klein's is a whirlwind amphetamine-fueled cab ride across a city. He called his book Life is Good, and Good for You in New York, Trance Witness Revels, which is a play on the oft-used newspaper phrase, Chance Witness Reveals, although it works perfectly, as leafing through the book is like being in a trance. It's frenetic and transporting. A few quick facts about this amazing book, and then we'll move on. In addition to the photographs, the original book came with a little booklet attached by a piece of string which contained all the text. Klein did his own typography, gave himself a ridiculously cool byline picture, and then wrote little notes about many of the images, which is another reason I love it so, because he provided context and he could write brilliantly. There are 188 notes for the book. Just listen to this one, which accompanies this photograph. Chinese New Year. This is the best of all New York celebrations. We arrive at noon. A huge tree of firecrackers 3 stories high burst, shaking the streets, and the dragon dance reached its paroxysm. We thought it's over now, we've missed it. But no, the feast swept through the streets like street fighting. The dragon, crazy with cymbals, drums and gongs, stopped at each shop, and the shopkeeper threw packages of firecrackers at the monster's feet. The dancer, a wet towel in his teeth, would stamp, heave and suffer with boundless energy and marvellous rhythm. With boundless energy and marvellous rhythm. Klein could almost have been writing about himself there. And lest you suddenly think that I own a copy of this fantastic book, of the original book, I don't. I wish I did, but they go for absolutely thousands of pounds now. But what happened a few years ago was that Errata Editions published this, which is truly a great thing. This is basically a hardback photocopy of the original book. And so you can, it's the closest that mere mortals like you and I can get to owning a copy without having to sell a kidney or a child. It really is great. Another thing to bear in mind is that both William Klein's Life is Good for You and Good in New York, Chance Witness Rebels, and Robert Frank's The Americans, both don't contain a single image of a dog. Now, I know I mentioned this last time and it's something I'm getting a bit hung up on, but I find this quite extraordinary that these two cornerstones of American street photography, for neither of them to carry a single image of a dog in them feels almost like a conspiracy. It's like something against the canine breed. Anyway, I'll shut up about that now. Klein's book has a couple of random unimpressed cats, a few monkey masks, and also, like Frank's, a shop sign about dogs, but this one is actually about real dogs, not hot dogs, and presumably from a pet shop window. What does this all mean? Probably not much. It's just one of those weird facts that my brain gets snagged on. Something to bear in mind though, and a real fact, if you want to know how important Life is Good for You and Good for New York is as a photo book, is to listen to this quote from Jerry Badger. Now, Jerry Badger knows a thing or two about photo books. He's written a 3-part definitive history of photo books with Martin Parr. And although he isn't a badger, he does know his photographic onions. And he has this to say about Klein's book.
Because William Klein is not just a photographer, not just a maker of photo books, not just the maker of probably the most important photo book ever.
That was from a 2015 interview, which is worth seeking out and watching, really because it's a bit of a car crash. After Badger has praised Klein solidly for about 10 minutes and told him that he thinks he's made the best photo book ever, how do you think Klein replies?
I don't understand a word you said.
Right, we're off to a good start.
And it all goes a bit downhill from there. Only for Klein, it didn't go downhill. After he'd made his book, he then went on to make one of the first pop films ever with this fantastically hypnotic study of the lights on Broadway and 42nd Street. Shortly after that film, he rang up Federico Fellini in his hotel room, and then Fellini asked Klein to come to Rome to be his assistant on Nights of Cabiria, which isn't actually bullshit, but a real story. Fellini already had his own copy of Klein's book, but when Klein got to Italy, he found that he had nothing to do. The film kept getting delayed, so he started shooting photographs in Rome, which led to another, slightly more conventional but still fantastic book, simply called Rome. But I haven't even mentioned Klein's fashion photography yet, which broke boundaries both in black and white and colour. He was the first photographer to shoot fashion out in the city with a telephoto lens so that the models could move freely about with people not knowing a shoot was taking place. And look, he even used a dog, so he did photograph dogs in New York after all. And after getting bored of doing this, he wrote and directed a feature film satirising the fashion industry and how it brainwashes people, called Who Are You, Polly Magoo? And this film still looks tremendous, like one of his own photos brought to life, and also contains moments of pure transcendental imagination like this.
Frémir comme les naseaux d'un cheval, alors vous êtes né sous le signe de la chance. Votre bouche est-elle grande, bien dessinée, droite, avec les coins légèrement relevés? Votre visage s'inscrit-il dans un cercle? Tout ce qui est rond est bon. Le sourcil est la clé de voûte de votre œil. Retrouvez l'équilibre de votre visage. Redistribuez vous-même ombres et lumières. Vous ne vous doutez pas de ce que peut être votre regard. Méfiez-vous. Vos yeux sont bavards. En un clin d'œil, ils disent tout. Adieu, rasoir.
Tout cela est à vous, ma chérie.
Tout?
Tout.
Not content with that, he then went on to make documentaries about Cassius Clay, before he became Muhammad Ali, about Eldridge Cleaver from the Black Panthers. He got his own CIA file, possibly because in 1969 he wrote and directed another satirical feature called Mr. Freedom, which is incredibly scathing about American foreign policy and its involvement in Vietnam, without ever mentioning the word Vietnam. Klein's film is stunningly predictive of the contemporary superhero series The Boys, which features a main character called Homelander, who effectively is Klein's psychopathic, patriotic superhero, Mr. Freedom, 50 years later on, just in better fitting lycra and with far fancier special effects.
Hey, you want to see something? Cold War, Phase 2. Harass the population.
Going through Klein's astonishingly varied CV, he sometimes comes across as a kind of artistic version of Woody Allen's Zelig, the character who just happened to turn up at many of the most significant moments in 20th century history.
Behind and to the right of Hitler, she spots Zelig. Struggling to make contact, she manages to catch his eye. Like a man emerging from a dream, Zelig notices her. In a matter of seconds, everything comes back to him.
But Zelig was an innocent and a chameleon who had no real agency or power over his own life. Klein, on the other hand, was an artist and an innovator. He reminds me actually a lot more of Justin Roiland and Dan Harmon's character Rick Sanchez from Rick and Morty. Rick is the most intelligent man in the universe, but also foul-mouthed and unable ever to settle. And even though it's always claimed he's based on Doc Brown from Back to the Future, I'm certain there's a touch of William Klein in there too. So predictably, I'm going way over time, and I haven't even scratched the surface of the range of Klein's achievements yet. In his lifetime, he published 14 or so photography books, directed at least 20 documentary films, 4 features, made hundreds of adverts just for the money, and we still haven't even touched upon the work he did painting directly onto his own enlarged contact sheets, or the fact that he has a small role in Chris Marker's incredibly influential film La Jetée, which is made up entirely of stills, was an influence on Terry Gilliam's 12 Monkeys, and incredibly was just voted the 67th greatest film of all time by Sight & Sound magazine. I can assure you that it's not. It's dated and pretentious, but Klein is there, in it. He's everywhere. Now, at the start of all this, I made the very bold claim that I was going to show you some photographs of Kleins that you couldn't see anywhere else. And now I intend to honour that claim. So the thing is that Klein became known as a photographer of cities. His first book was about New York. Then, as mentioned, he went on to do another one on Rome, and then one on Moscow, Tokyo, Torino, and Paris. Now, where is missing from that list? Obviously, as a Londoner, I'm biased, but I always was rather sad that Klein never came and did a book or even an assignment in my hometown, except that actually he did. In November 1980, the Sunday Times Magazine published a special front cover feature on a day in the life of Soho, a 16-page, almost entirely full-colour special feature written by the tremendously monikered Dennis Herbstein and photographed by none other than William Klein. These photos have never been seen in their entirety since the original publication 42 years ago. A few of them featured in a book and exhibition at the Photographers Gallery called Shot in Soho in 2019, and a select few more are behind the Times newspaper's online paywall. But apart from that, the only way to see all of them is to somehow source an original copy of that Sunday Times magazine. And typically, canny or maybe just greedy vintage magazine dealers are currently trying to flog that issue for as much as £125, which is a pretty huge markup for a free supplement that came with a newspaper that cost about 50 pence at the time. So to most avid Klein followers, those images are out of reach. They're unseen. But astonishingly, on the day that Klein died in September, I was walking through Soho and I found something sticking out of a skip. What was it, I hear you ask? Well, it was this. It was this executive briefcase, which looks like it was probably made in the 1980s. And I tried opening it. It's got a combination lock, but all of the combinations I tried were futile. So I brought it home and I had a think, and then I tried doing 198011, which is the date of the publication of the Sunday Times Magazine. And what do you think happened? That's right, it clicked open. And when I opened it, what was inside? Ah, my God, can you believe it? A copy of that Sunday Times Magazine. So here it is, and I'm going to share it with you now, you lucky people. Now, you may think that story I just told you is...
It's all bullshit.
So anyway, here is that magazine. This is the entire original copy, and I'm going to go through it now and show you some photographs from it. And I'm also going to tell you a few of the stories behind the commission. And these are stories, they're honestly true, that have never been told before. I've done a lot of research on this. So yeah, get ready, because this is going to be good. So the first thing to note is that the world was a very different place back in 1980. There are numerous adverts for advanced home video recorders, digital wristwatches. Andre Previn bizarrely pops up fronting not one but two adverts for Ferguson TVs and videos. There are cigarette ads, whiskey ads, and even an ad for the very executive briefcase I found the magazine in 40 years later. A testament to the manufacturer's claims that it is built by craftsmen to last a lifetime and looks like $1 million but costs a mere £38.95. But the Sunday Times Magazine was also quietly revolutionary in its own way. Parts of it might seem dated now. There's a 2-page article on the Emmanuel soft porn film franchise, but it also gave valuable work to some of the best photographers in the world. So in this issue, in addition to Klein's piece on Soho, there's also a story on NATO war games in Germany, shot by Magnum photographer René Burri. And other photographers to work for the Times included David Bailey, Mark Reboux, Diane Arbus, Don McCullen, Tony Ray Jones, the list goes on. The magazine's picture editor was Bruce Bernard, brother of the infamous newspaper columnist Geoffrey Bernard, and so he would have appreciated what a coup it was to get Klein to do the issue. Especially as, unlike many other famous street photographers, I can find no other photos taken by Klein in London ever, anywhere. Now, the reason for this might be that Klein had had a bad experience which was associated with London back in the late 1960s. Remember his film Mr. Freedom? Well, prophetic though it might have been, it didn't exactly set the box office on fire. And to add insult to injury, in the same year it came out, 1969, a trendy London fashion boutique opened up on the King's Road called Mr. Freedom. Not only did the shop's owner, Tommy Roberts, steal Klein's film's title, but he also shamelessly plundered its designs, imagery and garish colour palette, all of which, remember, had been designed by Klein himself. Look, here's the film's poster. Klein painted that. Klein is on record as saying that his lawyers told him that even though everyone could see he'd been ripped off, there was nothing that he could do because although the subject and title of the film were copyrighted, that was only for theatrical and media purposes, but not for clothing. So Roberts was at liberty to keep on using the name and style without a penny ever going to Klein. Remember, Klein had worked in the fashion industry for years. He satirised fashion in Who Are You, Polly Magoo, and he didn't exactly mince his words about what he thought of the fashion industry.
A lot of the people in fashion are full of shit, and you want to avoid them as much as possible.
So did this bad experience keep Klein away from London? Who knows, it might have done. But a decade later, Bruce Bernard managed to lure him across the channel to earn some real money shooting for the Sunday Times. Now, as mentioned, the article is 16 pages long, and including the cover, features 28 of Klein's photos, so less than a whole roll of 35mm, but still a good selection of images. I'm not going to show every single one of them here, but what I will do is put them all up on the community page as stills so you can go over there and take a proper look. There are a few absolutely great shots though. The front cover might be a setup. That bloke right at the back looks like he might be laughing, but it's still a brilliant flash image, and for the record, the building they're coming out of is number 69 Dean Street, which is apt, and in the 1980s was a massage parlour, but in the 20s, 30s and 40s was a private members club called the Gargoyle, which had its interior decor done by Henri Matisse and Augustus John, and included a fountain in the centre of the dance floor. Famous society members of the Gargoyle Club included Somerset Maugham, Noel Coward, Fred Astaire, Virginia Woolf, and here's a photo of H.G. Wells getting pleasantly twatted there in 1939. It later became a strip club called the Nell Gwyn, and then, as you can see, a place where men in bad suits would visit for a happy ending, only to find William Klein waiting for them outside. I really wanted to find out a bit more about all these photos and the assignment, but the problem is, obviously, Klein's dead. Bruce Bernard, the picture editor, is dead. But you know who's still alive? That's the journalist, Dennis Herbstein. So I did a bit of sleuthing and I found an email address for Dennis and I wrote him an email, and guess what? He got back to me. Now, I would love here to show you a picture of Dennis, but the problem is that when you put his name into a Google search online, he writes a lot of obituaries now, and you just get loads and loads of pictures of all the dead people that he's been writing obituaries about, none of him. So we're going to have to use another picture to stand in for Dennis. Tell you what, we can use this one from Klein's New York book. Anyway, Dennis has given me a sketchy bit of background information. It was 42 years ago after all, and he's lost his notebooks. But what he did confirm was that the entire idea for the whole piece was his. And then Bruce Bernard came up with the idea to try and get Klein over to photograph it, and it was a huge coup for them to get him. Bernard set up this photo of Francis Bacon at Whistler's in Old Compton Street, and Dennis had set up the interview with the French prostitute Christine in her flat, and Klein was given free rein to get any other shots that took his fancy. They interviewed Paul Raymond, the strip club owner and pornographer, and apparently both journalist and photographer were surprised to find that the strippers seemed more like home counties' mothers when they were backstage than ladies of the night. One of them was even knitting a cardigan, as you can see here. But apparently what really caught Klein's imagination was the home at 59 Greek Street, set up by the Theatre Girls Club for actresses fallen on hard times, which the caption here describes thus: a Hogarthian scene. There are a few actresses here today, old tarts, ex-convicts, refugees from broken marriages, many drunk, some unhinged. Phyllis, posh, Raj widow, incongruously reads a biography of Edward VII. I met him in India when he was Prince of Wales. My father was a colonel, you know, but I'm no different from the others. We're not here because we want to be, just unfortunate. This is a great and surprising photo to find alongside the more expected, seedy, glamorous, sexy photos of Soho, with its porn cinemas and massage parlours. But then again, Klein was always varied. He saw everything, and there are occasional echoes of his legendary New York book 25 years later on in his solitary London outing. Look at the neon lights in this shot. They can't help but bring back the memory of all the neon in Times Square, even if the sign now says Hollywood Singles Bar, not Wings of the Dove, and the passers-by are pensioners in headscarves. There's even a shot of some guns, although these aren't toy guns anymore, brandished by cocky New York street kids. Now they're guns being made by the Wilkes Brothers gunsmiths, who had a workshop in Beak Street since 1830 and took 800 hours to make a single gun that cost £8,000, so in a typical year they'd only produce 10. Quality rather than quantity. So Klein's photos and Herbstein's words are absolutely fantastic. They make a great combination, and there's full of interesting facts about a Soho that is rapidly vanishing or has vanished. I'm going to put the whole scanned article up on the community pages of YouTube so you can read it at your leisure, because it does take some time, but I would really urge you to do it because it's worth having a look at. It's a fantastic read. But Dennis in his email also gave me one truly fantastic little fact that has just blown my mind, which is that before he arrived in London to take these photos, someone had run over William Klein's foot in a car in Paris, and so when he arrived and met Dennis, he was in an absolutely foul mood. Now, this kind of detail, this kind of nugget is just like crack to me. I just find this fascinating. And I was trying to think, what this might mean for the photo shoot. But then I watched this interview that Klein gave with David Campney. I showed you a little bit of it before. And someone asked him a question about the influence he might have had on Japanese photographers. And during the interview, Klein gave the answer and dropped this bombshell.
There's one photographer called Daido Moriyama who's been ripping me off for about 30 years. And I've...
By the way, I just love Campany's face when Klein says that.
For about 30 years. And I've...
And look, I have no intention of going into whether or not this opinion is justified. That's for a completely different film entirely. But I do raise it here because then I went on and did some research and found something about how Moriyama had gone to Paris to meet Klein in 1980 and wrote an article called "Finally I Meet William Klein, Whom I Can't Get Out of My Head." So we know that in the same year that Klein shot this assignment in Soho, Daido Moriyama went to seek him out in Paris. So what if it was Moriyama who ran over Klein's foot just before he arrived in London? That's a possibility, isn't it? That the two great photographers meet and argue over who has ownership of a certain aesthetic style. Klein accuses Moriyama of ripping him off for the past 30 years. Heated words are exchanged. Moriyama jumps in his taxi, or better still, into his rented car and accidentally on purpose runs over Klein's foot as he speeds off. I mean, it's far-fetched, yes, and the details are blurry, but it could have happened, couldn't it? And then Klein, maybe even with his foot in a cast, arrives in London, in Soho, and starts taking photos with Dennis Herbstein in tow. Not on his toe, but in tow. And here's the last thing I'm going to say about that shoot, and I think I've saved the best for last, because remember earlier on when I said there were 28 photos in the article? Well, actually, there were 31, although those 3 extras are photos that were never published in the magazine. They're photos that only surfaced for the Photographers Gallery exhibition in 2019 and were found in Klein's studio. So these are photos that were never seen originally and lay dormant for about 40 years. And they've certainly never been seen as a piece with the other 28. So it's quite a thing. Now, these photos are great. And bizarrely, each one of them has a link to a cinema, which is fitting because Klein was, as you know, also a filmmaker. There's this one of an elderly couple walking past a porn cinema on Brewer Street, and Klein has caught the woman perfectly, taking a sneaky peek as her husband marches them away. Then there's this one of crowds of kids who for some reason look to me like foreign exchange students outside another porn cinema showing Emmanuel Queen Bitch, which is a nice lively flash shot. And remember, the very issue of the Sunday Times magazine that this story appeared in also featured a whole article on the Emmanuel films. So maybe it was dropped because the editors felt there was enough Emmanuel in the magazine already. But finally, there's also this shot, which I think is just totally first class and up there with Klein's best, certainly his best colour photos. Why this wasn't included in the original magazine, I have no idea. Dennis Herbstein wasn't able to shed any light on its exclusion, but thank God it did eventually surface, because it's a total corker. It's a classic London street photo that perfectly captures a recent, if now bygone age. Rocky II is showing at the cinema. All the men are smoking or staring. I don't actually think there's a single woman in this photo. The only reason I would have imagined they had for leaving it out of the magazine is that it's not technically taken in Soho. This is Coventry Street, Piccadilly, right by the tube station, and on the very edge, the boundary line of Soho. But Klein wouldn't have known that, would he? And remember, London's not his town, and he might still have been angry about the whole Mr. Freedom thing 10 years ago, and he's still limping because Dido Moriyama has run over his foot in Paris only just recently. So he strays out of his designated area, which was exactly what Klein would do, because he's always been a rule breaker after all. And he sees this bloke, who looks a bit like Bob Hoskins in a David Hockney syrup, and Klein thinks to himself, that's exactly what I want to be doing right now, to be putting my bad foot up and giving it a rest. So he lifts the camera to his eye and takes a shot, and no one sees it for the next 40 years. But here it is now, and it's brilliant. So thank you, William Klein, for all the photos and everything else. You truly were one of the best that ever did it, and surprisingly foul-mouthed too. My name's Stephen Leslie. This has been another predictably manic show and tell. If you've enjoyed all this, please subscribe. I know I keep saying that, but it really would help. And what I'm going to do, like I promised I would, is I'll put all of these images and the article itself up on the community page. It might take a few days because I don't know how many it allows me to upload at a time, but you can read them there and have a look at them at your leisure. So yeah, thank you very, very much. If anyone has any comments or any suggestions for future films, please let me know. I'm going to try and do another shorter one of these just before Christmas, and then I've got a little surprise, a little Christmas surprise for you as well. And thank you so much. They take a hell of a long time to make these things, so I hope people appreciate them, and thanks for watching. That's it. Goodbye.